Everything moves. The universe moves, space, galaxies, the earth with lava moving, water, the different animals on the earth, cheetahs, earthworms, bees, fungi, and plants. Some things move quicker than others, but some things end up moving so quickly that they can actually destroy the other ones. So, an example is that we have grasshoppers. They move so quickly, they could destroy a plant, and the plant cannot run away. The plant cannot flee. So what does it do? Well, it has to get eaten. The quicker animals and things that can eat the plants will consume them. Good for them. So they need to make a defense. So some plants produce big physical defenses, like these. This one here is a Joshua tree. It's a different, subspecies of Joshua tree. We have cacti with big spines, and we have these agaves and yuccas that produce lots of ways physically to defend themselves. But not every plant has big physical defenses. Plants have become chemical factories. Plants have evolved outstanding mechanisms for creating a diverse set of chemicals because they are one of the slower things in terms of moving compared to the things that want to eat them. In this picture here, there are many things that are pretty toxic. They produce a lot of toxins. I see several plants that are quite toxic. You can't just go up and eat this. If you wanted to, you'd have to cook it or prepare it or do something special to it. So through evolution, plants are chemical factories, and they produce things we call secondary metabolites. So a metabolite so there's metabolites of things that people need, or a living organism needs to exist. A secondary metabolite is an organic compound that's not directly involved in growth or reproduction, but it can confer some type of benefit to the survival of the plant. And so here is a picture of an unripe persimmon. You know what this is? Have you ever had an unripe persimmon? Probably not. But if you have, it has tasted acrid and bitter and nasty because the persimmon produces secondary metabolites called tannins. These tannins protect it. Now, secondary metabolites, that's everything we'll be talking about today is called a secondary metabolite. It's a molecule the plant produces that's not necessarily essential for growth and reproduction, but it might make it a lot easier to survive and reproduce. So, in our example of this little cricket or grasshopper eating this plant, guess what? This plant is super toxic. Boom. Does anyone know what this plant is? This plant is tobacco. This is tobacco. It is in the same family as tomato, Lucky Chimera. Yeah. An industry plant. Yeah. People use this in industry. So this is tobacco. And it produces nicotine, which is a neurotoxin, especially for insects. And so the little insects, when they consume this, they're dead. So powerful that people were like, okay, let's make an insecticide out of this. So people started taking a nicotine sulfate solution and using it as an insecticide. Turns out nicotine is very toxic to humans, so they stopped using this. So today we'll be talking about the toxicity of our flora. Toxicity to bacteria, toxicity to fungi, toxicity to animals, and toxicity to other plants. And so, we will have a note to begin. This presentation includes discussions of toxins, weapons, animal products, death, decay, and other unsavory things. So just a note that we will be talking about things scientifically. Some of them might be triggering. Okay. People have known about plant toxins for thousands of years. People have known about this for at least 20,000 years. There's data of oil from a plant on the tip of little arrows in southern Africa. Southern Africa. Um, the Sans people had a record of putting ricin on the tips of their arrows. Now, the arrows are small and they didn't seem very robust and able to kill anything, but what they were doing was they were using ricin to kill the plants, or to kill the prey. Now, they found ricinoleic acid on the tips of these, and they found that they were about 20,000 years old. They could be older, but this is a conservative estimate. So the plant that they were using is called castor bean, or Ricinus communensis. Communis? You might know this plant. Ricin is what I call it. But this plant grows in the tropics really well. It's a weed in the tropics. It grows well in the subtropics. We have this in Texas, and then it dies in the winter. Big, showy leaves, giant flower stalks. Now, people call it castor bean, but the main toxin in it is called ricin. The main toxin we have in this one is called ricin. Is this in Breaking Bad? The name castor bean is weird because castor is from castoreum, which is the dried resinoid extract of a beaver scent marking sac. So to get castor or castoreum, they'd have to rip out glands from the beaver, and so these are the glands that are in the groin of the beaver. And they said, okay, let's not do that. Let's use this plant instead for one of the products we need. And so I call it ricin because of the compound ricin, the plant. Now, this is what I normally see it. Deep, beautiful red stems with these kind of red flower structures and fruits. They're huge, but they're super toxic. These are the seeds. Now, ricin seeds, they look kind of like little ticks, but each of these little seeds is super potent. It has a toxin called toxalbumin, which disables the ribosomes. So within the cell, the ribosomes create the proteins. They help create the proteins. So there's a whole bunch of toxins called toxalbumins that inhibit protein synthesis. And interestingly, ricin has convergently evolved to be the same as the snake venom of viperine snakes. So if you get injected with ricin, that is basically like getting bitten by a very toxic viper. Not ideal. So the people 20,000 years ago were aware of ricin, and they would take a stick and smother ricin onto the tips of their arrows. The oil remained, and so that's how they could tell. Ricinoleic acid was found with this. People have been wanting to use plants to do damage to people for a long time, and we see this in our modern era. In the United States during World War I, they're like, hey, how about we put ricin on the tip of our bullets and all the shrapnel? Turns out that's a violation of the Hague Convention of 1899. It is especially prohibited to employ poison or poisoned arms in combat. And so they decided not to do that because it was a violation of what they agreed to. In World War II, they didn't really give a damn. And so Canada and the United States worked together to create ricin cluster bombs. So this was a big bomb that would drop these smaller ones. And ricin can be turned into a gas. And when inhaled, it's extremely deadly as well. These were tested out, and they're never employed because this other toxic gas was a little easier for them to use. Phosgene gas. But they could have used ricin instead. The Soviet Union is especially popular for using ricin against people they didn't like, even into like the 80s. So the KGB would utilize ricin against dissenters. This umbrella is kind of a famous situation in which the KGB assassinated a journalist in London using an umbrella that the tip was like a gun, and the bullet was coated with ricin. This is a replica. But this is 1978, So how much ricin will make one defunct? Because this guy got hit with a bullet, coated with ricin, and was gone. And people in Africa have been tipping the spears, their arrowheads, with ricin, so it must be a tiny amount. Well, to note, in the Renaissance period, there's a famous quote that we still use today from an individual named Periclesis. And his quote was, "All things are poison, and nothing is without poison. The dosage alone makes it so a thing is not poison." And this is kind of a mouthful, so we just say, the dose makes the poison. So everything is poison, everything is toxic. It's just the amount of it that you have that makes it toxic. Now, some things you need a lot less of it for it to be toxic or poisonous. Some things you'll need more of, like water. You could die by drinking water. That's called water toxicity. You could die by having too much oxygen. The atmosphere has like 21% oxygen. If you were to have 60% oxygen for 24 hours, you would be gone. You'd be dead. So there's hypoxia, which is not enough oxygen, and hyperoxia, or like too much oxygen. Because oxygen can create oxidative stress. Our body's evolved with a specific amount of everything. Everything is perfectly in homeostasis. So oxygen could be toxic. Water could be toxic. So a useful way to understand toxicity is an expression called LD50, which is the lethal dosage for 50% of a population to die. Lethal dosage 50%. It's the median amount. It's the amount of a substance that kills half of a test population within a certain period of time. Now, you would see a curve like this. So this curve here is kind of like, okay, mortality. On the y-axis is mortality from 0 to 100. On the x-axis is the dosage. Dosages of a chemical are usually in milligrams per kilogram. Milligrams of the chemical per kilograms. Titration curve, yeah. Milligrams of a chemical to kilograms of body weight. So LD50 is a way to communicate the acute lethality hazard for a substance. So how dangerous is it in an acute sense? It's a useful way to understand the hazard. Now, ricin, let's look at that. What is the LD50 of ricin for Matthew Gaston? Well, the LD50 of ricin could be intravenously inserted, and that is crazy low. So if you had ricin in a solution, and it was 0.001 milligrams per kilogram, then that would do me in per kilogram times 100. Inhalation, the inhalation is pretty similar, but this is orally. If you were to eat ricin, it would be 1 milligram per kilogram. Okay, so just for reference, 1 milligram of a general like powder would be about this big. If you took one of the standard paper clips, you know, the standard paper clips that are not the tiny ones, but the regular big ones, and cut it into 1,000 pieces, one of those pieces would be 1 milligram. This powder is pretty light, but at least you can see it. So if we did the math, with the LD50 of ricin orally ingested is 1 milligram per kilogram. Matthew is 100 kilograms. And a very conservative estimate of the amount of ricin per seed is 5 milligrams per seed. The ricin is stored in the endosperm, so the nutritive tissue of the seed. So after about 20 seeds, you know, 50, if there were 100 Matthews in the room, 50 of them would be dead at 20. But it's important to note that there's a point in which six seeds would kill the Matthew. So that's a gauge, just so you know. All right, so let's talk about plants that are toxic to bacteria and fungi. We won't be using LD50 to describe the dangerous, acute, lethal hazard to fungi, but we will be returning to it. So, acacia. You might know this tree, acacia. The toxic compound, there's many of them, but the one that's toxic to fungi and bacteria are tannins. Tannins. Actually, about 10% of all plants have tannins. 5 to 10% of all the plants have tannins. And what they do is they exhibit antibacterial, antifungal, and antiviral effects. They can prevent enzymatic activity, so they stop the molecular machines from working so that things cannot occur at the cellular level. They inhibit the synthesis of nucleic acids. So they do a lot. Unripe fruit can kill fungi. You often don't see fungi growing on an unripe persimmon, perhaps because they have a lot of tannins. The fascinating thing is that some plants even have whole cells dedicated to tannins. So each of these really dark maroon cells that has an arrow is a cell that is dedicated to tannin production. Now, only 5 to 10% of plants have tannins, but the ones that do, you'll know it. You ever had wine? You've had grapes. Grapes have tannins in them. Coffee, chocolate, tea, acorns, unripe persimmons, grapes. Grapes are actually critical. Ethan, grapes are what led to this is a big discovery. Grapes led to the discovery of a new organelle within the cell of a plant called a tannosome. So because people love wine, much like Lucy Goose, myself, and many others, people study the hell out of grapes. And in 2013, they discovered a new organelle within the cell called a tannosome. So there are these little structures in plants called plastids. So if you start at the top, you have a thing called a proplastid. The proplastid can become a bunch of other things depending on what happens environmentally and physiologically. So the proplastid can turn into a chloroplast. It can turn into a storage organelle. So it can store proteins, it can store fats, it can store sugars, it can collect energy from the sun and create, energy currency. Or, recently discovered, some chloroplasts convert into a thing called the tannosome, which is a specialized structure in the cell that just produces tannins. And these tannins are produced and they're popped off, because this is like a little blob, it can plop off part of it and move it around. It pops off part of itself called a shuttle vesicle, and it moves it into the vacuole. And then tannins are stored in the vacuole. If you have a cell, and the cell is smashed, the vacuole is probably going to be broken. The vacuole will get damaged when the cell is smashed, like physically. If I'm eating a leaf, I'll be mashing cells. And then the tannins will be released from the vacuole. So this is discovered like a decade ago. This is really recent. There's our tannosome. Oaks. If you ever have oaks that fall, the oaks will drop their leaves in the fall, and then you'll see them on the sidewalk, and the leaves will leave an imprint on the ground. That's because the leaves are full of tannins, and the acorns are full of tannins too. Oh yeah, Ethan, that's so funny. The proplastid is like Eevee, and these are all the different evolutions. That's Leafeon, this is Sylveon, then you get Vaporeon. Yeah, that's so good. But yeah, acorns are full of tannins. You can eat acorns, you just have to soak them to get the tannins out. If not, you'll get a lot of pain. Cassia. There's a lot of plants that produce a chemical called anthraquinones. These are also antifungal and antibiotic. Antibacterial, really. Now, there's an old Welsh rhyme. Eat leeks in March and wild garlic in May, and all the year after the physicians may play. This is wisdom, because garlic is quite antimicrobial. Garlic has many compounds that are inhibitory to bacteria and fungi, but the one that we mostly talk about is allicin. There's other ones like allogein. Some of these names are crazy, but allicin, I'll say allicin, that's what we'll say. Allicin is formed by damaged garlic. What happens is the plant has a chemical called alanine, and it is acted upon by an enzyme called alaninase. Alaninase then creates allicin here. Yeah, vampires. So Maybe vampires are afraid of Allison. You have a friend named Allison? Do the vampires like her? So in the plant cell, like we just discussed, alanine sits in the cytoplasm. So this is just a chemical that does nothing. And then we have an enzyme. This is a little protein that acts on this chemical and changes it into allicin. So allicinase sits in the vacuole, and alanine sits in the cytoplasm. When allicinase hits alanine, it becomes allicin, which is the antimicrobial. But you have to damage the vacuole or damage the cell. So if you cut the cell or break the vacuole, then this enzyme can interact with its alanine. Alliin? These names are crazy. And people have studied their, antibacterial effects. This is allicin on a petri dish of E. coli. So what they do is they grow E. coli all over this dish, and they put these little discs down with the chemical that you're trying to study. And you can see that the growth, what they do is they put the disc down and then they grow it, and you can see that the growth doesn't grow around the allicin. Additionally, with yeast, which is a fungus, you can see that it does not grow around the allicin. Ginger. So what's interesting is that a lot of the herbs and spices that we use, part of the reason why we might use them is because they inhibit microbial growth in food. You're like, oh, oregano's so tasty. Well, it stops bacteria and fungi from growing in it. And ginger. So the thing is that it so happens that we eat these plants. I know a lot of people that don't like ginger, but it's good to put in your food, because it inhibits a bacterial cell membrane cohesion, inhibits enzyme activity, and then stops biofilms from forming. So ginger has several compounds that do this. Gingerol, zingerone. Yeah. What we'll notice is that there's many things that we consider like food additives and flavoring that are actually just really important for keeping bacteria from growing. Oregano has a couple toxic compounds, toxic to bacteria, not to us necessarily. I mean, we'd have to eat a crazy amount of oregano to have any negative effect. But thymol and cabracrol, these are good ones. Basil, linalool, I love these names. Rosemary, eucalyptol. These are all antimicrobial compounds. They're monoterpenoids, which means it's like a 10-carbon compound, and they damage cell membranes and inhibit the mitochondrial respiratory chain complex. And so in this picture here, you can see that this little orange stick is supposed to be one of these chemicals. So maybe this is eucalyptol. Eucalyptol sits into the cell membrane and then inhibits the continuation of mitochondrial activity. So this is how it can disrupt. I would catch a linalool. Linalool. Yeah, we gotta do a pokey rhyme about all the toxins. Hops. Hops are added to beer. Hops are added to beer originally because they are antimicrobial. There's a bunch of different things in them that are antimicrobial, but they have some things called alpha acids and beta acids that inhibit the growth of unsavory things. So you can make beer without hops. You just might get contamination. That's the power. So one of the things that's worth noting is that over the course of like human development, we have been adding different herbs and spices to things. Maybe because they taste good, maybe because they actually keep the food from rotting and spoiling. And the people who like the flavor of rosemary and thyme and oregano and ginger were able to survive because they ate food that wasn't poisoned, because those compounds inhibited toxins from forming. Okay, now what about plants that are toxic to other plants? Well, that's called allelopathy. Allelopathy is a biological interaction where one plant negatively affects the growth and development of another through the release of chemical compounds. Yeah, this is chemical warfare. Plants are the ultimate chemical warfare machines. What they do is they sit in place and they just have to evolve new chemicals to survive and defeat their enemies in cruel combat. And one very famous textbook example of an allelopathic plant is black walnut of the Juglandaceae. It has a compound that is toxic called juglone. Juglone inhibits the growth of other plants nearby. It comes out of the leaves. It leaches from the leaves when it's rainy or foggy or dewy. It's released by decomposing leaves. It is exuded by the roots. This plant is like, I am here to grow and no one else will. It is successfully completing its life mission of existing. Here's a little picture. Everyone has known about this for a long time, so there's a lot of good literature on it. You can see this black walnut tree is killing these little white pine trees because they're sensitive to black walnut. You can see the ones within the root zone are immediately dying, and you can see there's a gradation, so this one is, about to perish, and these are fine. Another antisocial plant. There are some plants that black walnut plays nicely with. If you are interested in that, this is the best article I found describing it. The Virginia Cooperative Extension has a good little article on walnut trees. So if you have a black walnut tree and you want to grow something underneath it, there are some plants like crabapple that just so happen to be not affected by the allelopathy. Lantana. We have this all over Texas. If you're in India or any tropical region, you will know this plant as a wretched bastard, probably. In Hawaii, it's invasive, and other tropical places. It has a bunch of different alkaloid compounds that are toxic to other plants, and it's poisonous to us too. But it's super invasive. Now there's some native to Texas, and that's perfectly good. But this particular species, Lantana camara, is hyper invasive. It produces little berries that birds like to eat. Here's a picture side. A picture of a hillside. A picture side? Right? That's a new word. This is all lantana. Yeah. It's a lovely plant for butterflies and things, but it's also allelopathic. So it has oils in its leaves and that it exudes from the roots that inhibit the growth of other plants. And so it's taking over here, and it might, these plants might be resistant, but there's some other plants native to this area that might not be, so it might not make it. Okay. Casuarina. You might know casuarina if you've been to Big Bend National Park, or if you are from Australia. This is a tree from Australia that's called she oak, but it's not an oak. She's gorgeous. This is Casuarina equisetifolia. Beautiful tree. That's why people plant it. Super drought tolerant. It loves to be near water. It's salt resistant too, so they planted these in the beaches, some by the beaches in Hawaii. But it is also allelopathic. They spread like crazy, and they inhibit growth of things around them. Here's what you might see what it normally looks like. So the casuarina will often be near a waterside, and it will be the only thing growing there. Nothing else can really survive. They create a lot of shade. They produce chemicals that are toxic. The toxic compound is a huge, crazy name, but a 2,4-D-TPB is what it's called. Okay, now, what plants are toxic to animals? Well, there's a lot of them. Mint, toxic, super toxic to animals. Extremely toxic to animals if you're an insect. If you're human, you're fine. Have you ever seen insects eating your mint plant? You probably have, but there won't be a lot. Mint has a ton of different chemicals in it that are like anti-feed, which means it'll stop animals from eating them. And there's some that are straight up like insecticides. Menthone, carvone, polygone. These are all crazy. So they have a lot of different compounds. A lot of animals are, not a fan of mint. Chrysanthemums. Chrysanthemums. Beautiful plant in the Asteraceae. They produce chemicals called pyrethrins. Has anyone heard of pyrethrins? Pyrethrins are actually an outstanding organic, naturally produced insecticide. Pyrethrin sounds like it causes fever. So these are quite exceptionally beautiful. This is a hybrid, but the one that is most notably cited for having a high concentration of pyrethrins is Chrysanthemum cinerare. Okay, we'll try again. Chrysanthemum cinerariae folium. See, it's a mouthful. Now, this plant has seeds that in the seed coat, they produce pyrethrins, which are 6 chemicals. They grow all over Korea. I think some of them are originally from like Western Asia, Central Asia. In the 1800s, so the story goes, this is a story, we don't know if it's true or not. In Persia, soldiers would collect the seeds and grind them up into a powder, and that powder they would use on themselves to deter like ticks and insects because it has a natural insecticide, pyrethrins, which are 6 distinct chemicals. And then in the 1800s, that insecticidal property was discovered in Asia. And so then it became very popular in Asia. And then now we produce it as a little bottle. So pyrethrins naturally occur in the seed of this chrysanthemum, and people have been using them for hundreds of years. If you want something tried and true, then maybe go for pyrethrins. Hey, Fluffy. Thank you for the gifted sub. Drew said, isn't the chrysanthemum the symbol of Japanese monarchy? I don't know. You heard thing about, okay, it could be the same thing. Coffee. Coffee is toxic, especially to insects. I mean, mostly to insects. Caffeine. Caffeine has the same effect as nicotine on insects. It's like a neurotoxin. If an insect eats a leaf and it has caffeine in it, they're going to be paralyzed. But a lot of people are like, oh, well, what? Actually, I drink a lot of coffee. How much coffee can I drink without the caffeine killing me? Well, let's see. The LD50 of caffeine is about 150 milligrams per kilogram. And let's use me as an example. I'm 100 kilograms. 1 ounce of espresso, which is called an espresso shot, is 63 milligrams on average. That would mean for 50 of the 100 Matthews to die, we would need to drink 238 espresso shots, which is about 1.5 gallons of espresso. But there are some Matthews that do not make it past 80, and they bite the dust quickly. So if I drank half a gallon of espresso, I could die. The issue with thinking this way is that you forgot that your heart would probably give out before this. So this is simply the toxin. This is a complex system, so there's many other things going on. There's many other things going on here. So to drink this much, to drink 240 shots of espresso, that is 1.5 gallons. You'd probably get water poisoning before dying of the caffeine. So, yeah. Kidney beans. I put this in here for Sassy Frog. Now, you can't really die from kidney beans, but they have a chemical called phytohemagglutinin. That's right. I said that perfectly. Kidney beans. You got to soak them. So a couple of the different legumes will have this compound that's called the lectin. It's a protein that we naturally have, but in too much high quantity, it can be dangerous. You have to soak kidney beans for 5 hours or cook them at 100 degrees Celsius for 10 minutes to get rid of these. Ooh, okay. Joey's Rattata, thank you for the gifted subs. That is very sweet and appreciated. Are you a fan of kidney beans? Thank you so much. Vaquero, hello. So, what, J. Carl, which has been the most toxic so far? We talked about ricin at the beginning, and that's been the most toxic. We're working our way up towards most toxic plants, beginning with this one. So, Sassy Frog. I wanted to put the LD50 of this here, and no one has it, because there's no LD50 for phytohemagglutinin. That's the thing, is that there is no LD50 because no one dies from it. They just get extreme discomfort. They get extreme discomfort, the stomach hurts, there's diarrhea. So I put this in here for you. And education, obviously. Well, this will be on YouTube, yes. Okay, anthuriums. I always say anthuriums. It's anthuriums. You ever seen this thing? People call it the flamingo flower. I call it an anthurium. You know they're toxic? They have calcium oxalate crystals. Calcium oxalate crystals. Now, these are fascinating little guys. They're also found in taro. If you know kalo or taro, if you've had poi, calcium oxalate is in taro. Calocasia esculenta. You cannot eat taro raw. You've ever had Edo? You can get kidney stones. Kidney stones are made of calcium oxalate chiefly. But these plants have them as a defense. Now, a lot of people love taro too, frazzled intent. Taro is indeed delicious, but you just got to cook it and you're fine. Now, because people love eating taro, there's a lot of research on it. And we have a lot of people who study the calcium oxalate crystals. Now, if you eat it raw, you might get some numbness and some scratchy throat and maybe a little inflammation. Maybe it's hard to breathe. Some people aren't affected. Some people are hyper affected. But here in this picture, you can see the RB. These little kind of dark red dots are where there's the calcium oxalate in the wild taro. Now, this group has identified 4 types of calcium oxalate. There's needle-like pieces. So there's little free sections. They form like needles. These are sharp. There's rafide bundles. These are distinct sections of calcium oxalate. Druce. This is a fun word. I feel like I need to be an archaic, like old druid and say this word. And then there's prisms. This is pretty. They form a little prism. So there's different types of ways that calcium oxalate can crystallize and be formed in the plant and stored. Dumb cane is a common name. I have a bunch of houseplant books from like 1970. And I've always called this plant Dieffenbachia. But then if you look at these old houseplant books, they call it dumb cane. And the reason why it's called dumb cane is because it literally makes you dumb, which means you cannot speak. That's what that means. So if you were to consume this plant, because it has calcium oxalate, these are all in the Araceae. The arum family. Most people don't use this name anymore because it can be strange. But people who consume this plant raw often lose their ability to speak, and so then they're considered dumb. The throat will swell, not ideal. So my parents had a Dieffenbachia. They told me it was a Dieffenbachia, and they said we got rid of it because we didn't want you eating it as a baby. So I went through home videos this morning before stream to see if I could find any pictures. There's this one here that might be like a wild Dieffenbachia, but it might not be. So my parents were very cautious about making sure that they didn't have plants in our home that were toxic to an interested Matthew that liked to put everything in his mouth. Those were our dog. That's a dog. Brooke, named after Garth Brooks. They had fake fig trees instead of real figs because they didn't want me accidentally eating the leaves and getting latex. This is Easter. This is, my dad when I was a little kid. This is when I got baptized. That's my cousin. But there was a fake fig in the back. There's my grandfather, my other grandfather, my grandmother. Very cute. Fake figs. Figs can have latex. Not good for little kids. And when you're small, you have less kilograms, so that the danger of a toxic plant is a lot higher. This is me as a baby after being baptized. But look, there's a pothos in the back. My mom loved pothos. She always had pothos everywhere, but everything else was fake. Here, more real pothos. Perfect for babies to grab. And then pothos by the fireplace. They took photos of the dogs. It was very cute. I watched this video this morning, and they were opposing. That's Ty and Brooke. But yeah, more pothos. I think they moved them as I got older, but it was very funny to see these in these home videos. Pothos everywhere. I have a cutting of this pothos in my home now. I took it, and so my parents' pothos lives on with me. But pothos also has calcium oxalate, and the little crystals. These are those free needle shapes, raphides. Yeah, so don't eat pothos. This one, it has the Maori word, onga onga, or we would call this the tree nettle, stinging nettle. If you know stinging nettle, it's called stinging nettle for a reason. It has needles that are hypodermic. They inject the toxic compounds into your skin. Now, they inject histamines, serotonin, formic acid. Formic acid is what ants have when they bite you. So if you get stung by this, it feels like an ant bite and some other things. It's a cocktail of compounds. Histamines cause swelling. Yeah, antihistamines, you take them to stop the swelling. Well, this is very edible. You just have to know how to prepare it and hold it and cook it, and it's safe to eat. But look at these trichomes. Trichomes are the hairs on the leaf. These are massive, and so I chose this particular species, Urtica ferox, because you can see the trichomes really well. The top, it will break off, and then it injects all of this fluid in there. Stinging nettle. There's many types of nettles in the genus Urtica. This one is from New Zealand, or Aotearoa. Here's a closer picture of the stinging hairs of nettle. This one here in B, you can see how there's like a tip that breaks off. That little tip will break off and then it'll inject everything. Yeah. Okay, desert rose. I included this one because a lot of my friends, Raymond and other people here, are fans of the beautiful succulents of the world. Desert rose, adenium, is a toxic plant. It has latex that has compounds that are cardiac glycosides. Obesum, because it's nice and thick. Complementary. You can see if you cut the plant, it exudes this kind of sap, and that can be quite bad. Okay, now we're getting to the more toxic things. The poison vines. Poison vines. These are all in the genus Toxicodendron, which means toxic tree. Now they're all the same genus: poison sumac, poison ivy, and poison oak. Now you can see they're all pretty much the same, except poison sumac has some more leaflets, but they have a compound called erythritol. It's an oil that gets on your skin. I did research in Oakland, studying oaks. That's where Oakland is named after oak trees. And there was poison oak everywhere, and we had to get the measurements around the tree, called dBH, the diameter of the tree. And there would be poison oak everywhere, so I had to wear long sleeves and use soap to get it off, but then it would always get on me, and it caused chemical burns. And every time it happened, it got worse and worse and worse. These are in the family that's related to mangoes, Anacardiaceae. So a lot of plants in this family of poison oak and mango, they have some interesting oils and chemicals that are toxic, mostly cause contact dermatitis. But if you were to ingest this would be wretched. Okay, this one is, I think, from Peru. The name that I learned it as was called Be Still Tree. Some people call it yellow oleander. Some people call it cascabel. But this plant has a bunch of neurotoxins. They're thefedin A and B. It's also called lucky nut because it produces a little fruit that looks like a little nut. It's a beautiful tree. It does super well in subtropical and tropical environments. And it creates a nice hedge, but it's quite a neurotoxin. Black nightshade. You might know this one. The nightshade family, Solanaceae. Super. Lots of these. These are some ultimate toxic chemical plants. What they do is they a lot of them have this compound called solanine. Um, Belladonna, yeah, datura, tomato. So I was reading about the toxicity of the nightshades, and one of them was someone made tea out of the leaves of their tomato plant, and they died. First of all, tomatoes smell nasty. Maybe I have evolved successfully to find it unpleasant uh, to avoid being poisoned. But yeah, tomato leaves are toxic. They have solanine. The ripe berries of black nightshade have a ton of solanine. A potato, a green potato, when a potato turns green, that green skin has solanine in it. So you can just shave that off and you'll be fine. Crazy stuff. The LD50 is 3 milligrams per kilogram. Now this is more toxic than ricin. Eggplant. Yeah, eggplant is in the nightshade family. Hemlock. People love hemlock. Not really, but hemlock has a bunch of different alkaloids in it, but the one that's most notable is called coniine. It's in the carrot family, Apiaceae. It looks like wild carrot, but it's not. Its compounds are similarly closely related to tobacco. It is toxic enough that if you ate 6 of the leaves, most adults wouldn't survive that. The seeds and the roots have more toxins in them than other places, and in the spring, the plant produces the highest amount of toxins. So one thing to note is that when you talk about plant toxins, different tissues, different times of year, and different stresses will trigger different concentrations of that toxin. So in the hemlock, it's been researched very well because it is a quite an intense toxin, and it's particularly dangerous for livestock. If you have a pasture or a ranch, and your cattle and pigs eat this, they might not make it. It's also famous for getting rid of famous Greeks. The classical Greece would kill their people that they didn't like Boeotian, the good. He was actually a very good person, it seems to be, but democracy led them astray. And in Athens, they said, "Okay, everyone's going to vote," and they accused him of treason for being too pro-Macedonian. Uh, and then they said, "Okay, time to drink the hemlock." And then he died, and then they're like, "Actually, we made a big mistake. He did nothing wrong. Let's kill the guy who started the uprising against him." And then they built a statue in honor of him. Additionally, Socrates is probably the most famous for having consumed hemlock and dying, for infecting the minds of young men, that is his formal sentence. Okay, this is a classic Texan plant. If you live in Central Texas, you might know this one. This is the Texas mountain laurel. This plant smells beautiful. It smells like grapes for like 3 weeks in the spring, and it produces little fruits that look like bean pods. Inside the bean pods are these red beans. Now, I had one of these in my front yard, and these little red beans would fall on the ground. And what we would do is you grab them and you rub them on the sidewalk, and you'd put them on your skin and they would burn. But my parents always said, you need to wash your hands after this because they're very toxic. And I said, okay, well, I just won't touch them anymore. The compound in this plant is a hallucinogenic compound. They're little red beans. They have an extremely hard seed coat. Their seed coat is at least 1 millimeter thick, or 2 millimeters even. They're extremely thick seed coat. The compound is cytosine. Cytosine is a hallucinogen, and so indigenous people in Texas would use this plant for rituals because you can, connect with the universe. The thing is that if you have too much, it'll kill you. It's related to nicotine, and this compound has been used as a nicotine substitute to help people stop utilizing nicotine. But one seed could kill one person. The seed has so much cytosine that if you consumed it, you wouldn't survive. The thing that saves people is that the seed coat is so hard. Our human stomachs cannot dissolve the seed coat, and as long as there's not a hole, in the seed coat, you could accidentally swallow the seed and survive because your stomach acid couldn't break it. It is quite dangerous. The other common name is mescal bean, like mescaline, from peyote. Okay, now, as we wrap up with our most toxic plants, let's identify one plant in particular, that is actually not that toxic, but everyone says, oh my god, it's so dangerous. Poinsettia. Poinsettia, deadly, says scientist. Not really, it's not. It's not toxic. I mean, don't eat a bunch of salad of poinsettia leaves, but even if you did that, you'd be fine. Is it deadly if you're a cat? I don't even think it's deadly if you're a cat. Poinsettia. I mean, it could be. But poinsettia has latex. But it's not that dangerous. This has spread since 1913. Euphorbia, the genus of plants that is quite morphologically diverse. Some of the euphorbias have very dangerous latexy sap that can be significant skin irritant. But this one is not. This one is not that dangerous, so. Okay, moving to the most toxic plant in the world. I will read some excerpts of what people have described this plant. One day, being hugely tormented with mosquitoes or gnats, and as yet unacquainted with the nature of this tree, I cut a branch thereof to serve me instead of as a fan. But all my face swelled the next day, and filled with blisters, as if it were burnt to such a degree that I was blind for 3 days. Okay, throw your guesses in the chat. Another one. A party of men were sent to cut wood, as the island apparently afforded plenty of that article. Amongst other trees, they were unlikely to cut down several of this tree, the juice of which, getting into their eyes, rendered them blind for several days. Last one. It has the smell and appearance of an English apple, but small and grows on large trees, generally along the seashore. They are rank poison. I am told that one apple is sufficient to kill 20 people. This poison is of such a malignant nature that a single drop of rain or dew that falls from the tree upon your skin will immediately raise a blister. Neither wood or fruit is of any use, that I can learn. Okay. Prevenant, your guesses. Oleander, prevenant, oak, badu, manchineel. It is the manchineel tree, native to Florida. This tree is native to Florida, the Caribbean, the northern bits of South America. It grows alongside mangroves. The manchineel tree has a ton of toxic compounds. And as we read, the little bits of water that come off the tree and hit your skin can cause irritation. If you have smoke, if you burn this wood, the smoke is extremely deadly. And it produces little apples. These little apples. This plant is in the Euphorbiaceae, fittingly. Euphorbia is something I internally think of as something toxic. Sapogenials, hypomannins, manchinellin, horbol, and many more other compounds. Manchineel isn't toxicity. Isn't toxic. It is toxicity. The toxicity of the world incarnate. There you go. So, turns out, it's actually not that deadly. Nobody really dies to manchineel. What is the deadliest plant in the world? Because we just saw manchineel has the most toxins. And if you touch it, your hand will burn. And if you get the smoke in your eyes, you go blind. But what actually kills the most people? What is truly deadly? We'll have a few seconds for you to guess. Drew says belladonna, Jimson weed, tobacco, oleander. Okay, these are great guesses. Datura, loosey goose. More people every year die from tobacco than anything else. Tobacco is the deadliest plant in the world. It has convinced us to grow it. It has convinced us to try using it as an insecticide. But as an insecticide, it was too dangerous to humans. We have been fooled into smoking it. And 8 million people die every year from tobacco. This is the most successful plant at killing humans. And it's due to nicotine. In the United States, about 500,000 people die every year due to tobacco. And in the world, it's estimated to be around 8 million. Yeah, nicotine itself is the compound found in tobacco. And, this includes everyone who has negative effects from secondhand smoking. So, when people ask you about deadly plants, all you have to do is look at the cigarette butts on the floor, and you'll see that it's right next door.